Stardance by Spider and Jeanne Robinson. So this book was copyright 1979, and I have this Dell paperback here that came out in 1980. But originally, this story started out as a novella in 1977 by the husband and wife writing team of Spider and Jeanne Robinson. Now, Spider mostly wrote on his own, and he was fairly prolific. He wrote quite a few novels and short stories. But him and his wife teamed up on this, originally the novella, later the novel here that came out. And then I think it was so popular, they continued writing in the series, and it's an entire trilogy. So she helped him write this entire trilogy, and I think that's where the kind of collaboration between the husband and wife team there ended. And Jeanne was a choreographer in her kind of real life, her job. And so she brought some very interesting elements to this story about dance. And we'll get into that a little bit more because it definitely has a science fiction meaning attached to it. And the first contact mixed with dance is very fascinating. And it was something that definitely kind of surprised me and felt very unique and a little different. Overall, this book was different, but very interesting. It was fairly entertaining throughout the whole novel. It surprised me in some ways, and I really enjoyed it in the end. We will definitely get into the pros and cons a little bit later, but this was a fun book to read. And let's kind of get into what this one is about. So he wrote this in the late 70s, or they wrote this in the late 70s, and it kind of takes place in a near future. I think it's like the 1990s, and then maybe gets into the turn of the millennium there. And we have a main character whose name is Charlie, and he was a dancer, and he was kind of in a relationship with a woman named Nori, and their kind of dancing career ended when Charlie ended up getting shot, and it kind of prevented him from dancing anymore. He kind of went into a depression. He started drinking a lot. The relationship with Nori ended, and we kind of find him almost at rock bottom in the beginning of this novel. Well, it turns out that Nori has a younger sister, and her name is Shara. And Charlie ends up kind of getting in contact with Shara. She reaches out to him. She is a dancer as well, and she's very talented, but she's kind of not the typical body shape or whatever you would want to say there for what was popular for dance at the time. So she ended up kind of meeting this guy who, due to some medical conditions, this guy was living up on a space station in very low gravity and sometimes zero gravity. And so Shara was up there on this space station with him, and some of the limitations that she was experiencing down on Earth kind of dissolved away, and she started dancing up in zero gravity and thinking maybe she could do something with this. So this woman, Shara, she reaches out to Charlie and says, "Hey, can we partner up on this? And maybe you can be my director." So he gets involved. He kind of sets up these scenes, the lighting. She is a very good dancer. She has a lot of the choreography down pat on her own. But Charlie's kind of helping out this whole event, and they're filming this, and they're sending it down to Earth for these shows, and it becomes kind of a international sensation. And Shara, she has this vision in her head of what these dances are supposed to be, and she has about 3 in mind that she wants to do, and she completes the first 2, and they just get more and more popular, and she's getting ready to kind of set up and do the third one when we get this first contact into the story. And humanity had noticed some lights maybe in the sky out by Neptune. They weren't sure what it was. But all of a sudden, these aliens, and they're kind of explained by little kind of globes of light, almost like fireflies, they show up around this space station, and there's a bunch of people who get involved with this first contact issue. We have some UN people, some political people, and they kind of pull in some of these, what we're terming star dancers, and Shara gets kind of thrown into the forefront in a way, and she kind of initiates this first contact with these aliens through dance. And it's a very interesting concept and idea. And there's a big event that happens kind of at that point. And I'm not going to spoil it, even though that's only about 1/3 through the novel. Something happens. It kind of compromises Shara in a way. And the aliens basically leave the solar system. And you have a very strong feeling that these aliens are coming back, but at that point they've left. So the next part of the novel, the novel's really broken up into 3 distinct sections, and that kind of sums up the first one without giving away too much. But then we move on to Charlie. He really feels this has kind of turned his life around. He wants to continue with this star dancing. And so he kind of has to shift gears in a way. He continues to do this as a job in a way. And he's spending a lot of time up in space. Eventually, these aliens come back, and everybody gets involved with this kind of second contact. And it's very fascinating the more you get towards the end of this novel. Spider and Jeanne explain some things in this fiction about where humans came from, maybe what our destiny is in the solar system and as humans. And it's pretty interesting where they take this novel. The end of it was really good in my opinion. And they kind of brought up a few things that are not typical in a lot of science fiction. One is this idea of first contact through dance. And it's explained in the novel a bit that before we had the written word as far as humanity goes and communicating with one another, we had a written word, and before that we had spoken word, and before that we had gesture and dance. And if we ran across a alien race that's intelligent, but we don't speak the same language, there is a pretty strong case to be made that gestures and maybe even dance could be a way to communicate with this intelligence. So it was done in a really good way. It was something I hadn't read before in science fiction. And then another kind of interesting topic they bring up is this idea that humanity is destined to leave the planet. And they use an analogy about like a baby in a womb, and at some point the baby has to leave the womb, otherwise they're basically going to pollute themselves in their own waste. And so when the baby is born, it kind of sets up the next phase for a human's life. And it's likened to that with humanity as a whole needing to leave the planet to move on to the next phase of what our destiny is. So overall, this was a fun, fast read. The pros were that it was entertaining. There was some interesting concepts. You had Spider and Jeanne with a kind of a different flair from anything that I've read recently. If you've seen videos or know anything about Spider, he's a bit of a hippie, and there's some of that brought into the novel, but it's not overdone. It's kind of in the peripheral at times because we have artists and choreographers, and there's a lot of that, nature, and that's brought into the novel, but it's not overdone. There's definitely more to it than that with this alien first contact, and I thought it was done really well. The some of the cons might be that the middle section was kind of slowed down a little bit, but it definitely picks back up towards the end. Our main character is not that likable through the whole novel. You might warm up to him a little bit, but this guy was kind of rock bottom. He's this artist who, it's kind of his way or the highway, and it can get a little annoying at times, but it wasn't too bad. And then some of the villains that show up in this one can be a little cheesy at times too, and there's not a lot of background brought in on some of those. But this novel in total was 269 pages. So overall, I was pleasantly surprised with this one, and I really enjoyed reading it. It was a very fast read too. There was nothing too confusing. It was just a very straightforward novel. So you know, it's probably not for everyone, but if some of those things intrigued you, it's definitely worth checking out. And that brings up these sequels. So book 2 is called Starseed, and book 3 is Starmind. And I am intrigued to read further into this trilogy. There are some things that happen at the very end of the novel Stardance that kind of makes me want to see where they take the series. Now, you could definitely just read this as a standalone. It's a complete story. You don't need to read any further, and I'm kind of on the fence right now. So let me know if you've read Stardance, if you've read the whole trilogy, and what your advice is on that. It's something you might see in the future pop up on my channel. You might see a series review of this whole trilogy if I get to it. So that's going to do it for that one. Next up, I'm reading The Mind Traders by J. Hunter Hawley. This is a wife's wildcard pick, and I know a lot of people were thinking, where are the cats or the adorable creatures on the cover of this one? But you'll have to trust me, there is a tie to cats in this one, but you'll just have to watch that video when it comes out to see how that tie was made. But just look for that one coming out next, and once again, thanks for watching.